Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Fundamentals of Situational Awareness. Allow me just a moment to introduce myself. I'm Rich Gasaway. I served 33 years as a first responder, including 22 years as an emergency scene incident commander. And then about 5 years before I retired, I went back to school and got a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, trying to understand how first responders use situational awareness as a foundation for making high-risk decisions. I've authored 6 books on the topics of situational awareness and high-risk decision-making, and I have a website, samatters.com, and that might be something worth just making a note of and jotting down, because on the website, there are over 400 articles that I have written on the topic of situational awareness and high-risk decision-making, and they're all free for you to use. There's no subscription, there's no membership. You just go to the website and all the articles are in the blog roll for you to access and use for your benefit. I also have a podcast with over 300 episodes. I think I just put up 316 this past Tuesday. And all the podcast episodes are free as well. I call them a podcast. I guess I should call it a show, because podcast is in the audio format, which it does exist in the audio format. You can get it, you can subscribe to it on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, again, for free. Or you can watch the show. I have a YouTube channel that you can watch the SA Matters show on YouTube. So it's more of a show than just a podcast. And it's all free. Even if you subscribe, it's free. The benefit of subscribing is you get a notice when a new episode goes up. And I've presented versions of the program that you're going to get today to more than 87,000 people worldwide. And for that, I'm very thankful for having the opportunity to share this message so broadly. Most of the situational awareness classes that I do are full day, and some are half day, but most are full day. So what does that mean for us today? Because we're not here for a full day. I can imagine you having to sit through a virtual program for a full day. What it means is we're going to get about 1/7 of what you would get in a normal full presentation. And I don't want you to think that I'm kind of baiting and hooking you by only giving you 1/7. That's just what we're going to be able to do in the time that we have together today. And then I want you to use the website as free resources to learn more, to take a deeper dive, to hopefully I can inspire you to want to build some of the concepts of situational awareness into the work that you do and to the things that you share and teach with others that you work with. Why is situational awareness so important for individuals and teams in high-risk environments? The answer to that question is simple. It's because situational awareness is the foundation for good decision-making. Now, it's completely logical that the better you understand a situation, the better your decision-making is going to be. That's kind of like a no-duh kind of statement. But there's a weird thing about situational awareness, and that is you can have terrible situational awareness, horrible situational awareness, zero situational awareness, and still make a great decision. We call that lucky. And out there in the world, there are a lot of people who have lucked their way into successful outcomes. And in fact, I would put myself in that category. As I look back through my career, it is easy for me to see many examples of times where my situational awareness was horrible. I didn't realize it in the moment. I usually had that realization after the fact, but I didn't know what I didn't know about what was going on. And I was making some pretty high-risk decisions that could impact lives of civilians and of first responders. And I realized that there were plenty of times where I was lucky. And that really doesn't feel good, to know that you had a successful outcome more from luck than from skill. So let's see if we can figure out a way to program out some of the luck and replace it with a skill set that can actually improve high-risk decision-making. And that skill set is situational awareness. So let's start with a definition of what situational awareness is, and we'll use that, we'll reference this definition for our entire time together. Situational awareness is your ability to perceive and to understand what is happening in the environment around you, while being mindful about how time passes. Because as time passes, conditions change. And as conditions change, so should our awareness. And then, in this next part, truly is the gold of situational awareness. And that is being able to accurately predict what's going to happen in the future and to make those predictions in time to prevent a bad outcome. So as you're preparing for and working in your high-risk environments, I would hope that you would keep the definition of situational awareness in mind. There's just one problem. That's a big definition, and it's a lot to remember. And there's going to be a lot on your mind already, and to try to remember all of this while you're processing all of that might just be a little overwhelming. So I've simplified it. I've got it down to 3 red highlighted words. If you can just remember those 3 red highlighted words, perceive, understand, and predict, as you're preparing for and operating in high-risk environments, it will improve your situational awareness, I promise you. Now, what I'm going to share with you this morning is truly complex neuroscience, but I don't want to present it in a complex way. That would get boring. I want it to be friendly. I want it to be easy to understand. In fact, I want it to be so easy to understand that you could then teach it to someone else. So I use a lot of analogies and metaphors as I talk about how we develop and maintain situational awareness. So let's start by building a house. To build a house, you have to first have a foundation. On the foundation, you put walls. On the walls, you put a roof. The foundation for situational awareness, the start of it all, is what we call perception. Perception is the process by which you use your 5 senses to gather information about what's happening in the world around you. Seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling. If you were to ask somebody, hey, do you have good situational awareness? And if that person responded and said, well, yeah, I think I do. And if you said, well, how do you know? Or what do you do that ensures you have good situational awareness? There's a good chance that person might say, I pay attention. Or they might say, I'm always looking up, down, and all around. Or they might say, I actively listen to the things that are happening around me. Or they might say, I conduct the size up. If you talk with anybody who describes their situational awareness using any of these terms, they're not wrong, but they're only describing the beginning. There are 2 more component parts to situational awareness beyond paying attention. Now, before I go too much further, I want to pause and give you a situational awareness best practice. When you are arriving on the front end of whatever problem that you're going to be dealing with, I would like for you to keep this in mind. Focus on just 5 to 7 of the most critical pieces of information that you need to know to form your awareness and to make your decision. Now, in the environment that you're operating in, there may be dozens, maybe even hundreds of pieces of information coming at you. Do not try to make sense out of all of it. If you do, it will be very easy for you to become overloaded and overwhelmed. And this has to do with the limited capacity of short-term memory. The average person's short-term memory capacity is only 5 to 7 pieces of unrelated information. That's not very much. And it gets worse. As you put a person under stress, their average of 5 to 7 reduces to 3 to 5. So if you're working in a stressed environment, your brain can actually capture, hold, and put together and understand 3 to 5 pieces of unrelated information. So let me give you an example. If I took a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle and I dumped it out onto the table and I didn't let you see the cover, so you don't know what the end result is going to be, just like with most of the problems we deal with, we don't know what the result's going to be. And I dumped the puzzle out and I said, every piece of that puzzle represents facts, information, 1,000 pieces of it. Put it all together and make sense out of it. How long would it take you? I guess the average person would say at least a couple of hours, which wouldn't be unreasonable. But if I gave you a different puzzle and I opened up the lid and I dumped it out on the table and the whole puzzle, the entire puzzle was 5 pieces, like one of those little kids puzzles that a 2-year-old or 3-year-old would put together, really big pieces, and you just fit them together quick. And I said, how long does it take to put a 5-piece puzzle together? I think you'd say seconds. That's how I want you to be thinking when you're gathering the information on the front end of a problem that you're trying to resolve quickly to make a good decision. Focus on the small number of the big, most important pieces of information that you can piece together quickly to form awareness and use that as the foundation for your high-risk decisions. And in fact, if you try to process too much information, you literally can get to the point where you can't make a decision at all. Your brain can get so overwhelmed with the volume of input coming in that you can experience something called analysis paralysis. The paralyzation of the executive function of your brain to the point where you couldn't even make a decision because you're overwhelmed with too much information. You have 5 senses that are always on: seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling. Very few people have probably ever stopped to give any thought to how the outside world gets into that 3-pound little blob of clay that we call the brain. And then how does the brain make sense out of it all? Well, we're going to take the mystery out of it. Let's begin with vision. As you look out on the world, for you to be able to see anything, there has to be light. In the absence of all light, in total darkness, there's no vision. There has to be light to stimulate the nerves inside of your eyes. So if you look around the space where you're at today and you can see things, it's because there's light bouncing off of all those things that you can see. Some of that light bouncing around the room comes into your eyes. The nerves inside of your eyes take the rays of light, turn them into electricity, and shoot that electricity back into your brain. The brain is a very dark place. Not one bit of light you see actually gets inside your brain. All the light ends at the eyeball. The only thing that gets inside the brain is electrical impulses traveling down a nerve highway. As you listen to something or someone, sound waves come into your ears. The nerves inside your ears take the sound waves, turn them into electricity, and shoot that electricity back into your brain. The brain is a very, very quiet place. Not one sound you hear actually gets inside the brain. All the sound ends at the ears. And so it goes for all 5 of the senses. So the brain is really only making sense out of a grouping of electrical impulses coming in from the 5 senses. Now, your perception, the input, is perhaps the easiest part of situational awareness. All you have to do to have perception is be conscious, alert, oriented, and scanning your environment. Essentially, keep your head on a swivel. And you pretty much got the first part of situational awareness in the bag. Woohoo! Celebrate. Not so fast. There's a problem. It's not always obvious or intuitive as to what we should be paying attention to. You can be all in, completely paying attention to what you think is the most important thing in the environment that you're operating in, and it might be, and it might not be. You might be looking off to the left, completely paying attention to something off to your left, and off to your right is something that's happening that you're completely unaware of. And that is happening to the right could be the thing that causes you a problem, including hurting you or killing you. But you're completely paying attention, but only to the wrong thing. So it's not always easy to figure out, especially in dynamically changing environments, what we should be paying attention to. So your five senses, think of it, instead of all gathering up a whole bunch of electrical impulses, think of your five senses are all gathering up pieces to a jigsaw puzzle. The eyes gather some of the puzzle pieces, ears gather some, nose, mouth, skin that feels, all gathers up pieces to a jigsaw puzzle, sending them into the brain, trying to reach a destination where the jigsaw puzzle gets assembled. And when those pieces reach the destination and the puzzle gets put together, you advance to the second part of the situational awareness development continuum, the walls of the house, so to speak. And that is what we call understanding. Understanding means making sense out of what you see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. Sometimes that's called comprehension. Sometimes that's called having a moment of clarity. Now, let me make the delineation between perception and understanding. Perception is just gathering up the puzzle pieces. Understanding is the assembly of the puzzle pieces into a clear picture of what is happening. As you're trying to understand what's happening in the environment around you, I would like for you to adopt a mindset of curiosity. I'd like for you to be inquisitive and to ask yourself questions. Now, as I suggest that you ask yourself questions, I don't mean figuratively, I mean literally. Use that little voice inside of your head called self-speak and ask yourself these questions. But then also force yourself to come up with answers to the questions. Questions like, what does this mean? I see this, but what does it mean? We see the world in two dimensions, but the world actually exists in three-dimensional space. So to ask ourselves the deeper meaning of the things that we're seeing is to be curious about what's happening beyond our field of vision. What's happening on the other side of a wall? What's happening in the next building over? What's happening inside the machine that I can't see because I can only see what's happening on the outside of the machine? Asking ourselves the deeper meaning of the things that we hear. I hear an unusual noise. Asking ourselves, what could that mean? Somebody says something to us, to ask ourselves the deeper meaning of what they're saying. Because oftentimes when people talk, there is a deeper meaning beyond their words. Sometimes it's the words they choose that has an additional meaning. Sometimes it's the inflection in their voice. Sometimes it's their stance or posture. Sometimes it's what they don't say. Silence can send a very powerful message. The second question I'd like for you to ask yourself is this what I expected? We come into every situation with expectations. When we arrive to the scene of a problem, we arrive with expectations about that particular problem, which is good because that can keep us from being surprised or caught off guard. So that to that extent, we put expectations in the victory column. But it doesn't stay there long because there's some sinister things about expectations. If you come into a situation and you expect to see something based on information that was shared with you before you even arrived at the problem, you may see what you expect to see, even though it's not happening. You're hallucinating. I know it's hard to believe. I think I've just taken you into the denial zone. You're going to think that would never happen to me. I don't hallucinate. You do. You just don't realize it. That's one of the sinister things about this expectation part of situational awareness. If you come into a situation and you don't expect to see something, you may not see it happening, even though it is happening. You're reverse hallucinating. If you come into a situation and you expect to hear something, you may hear what you expect to hear, even though it wasn't said. If you come into a situation you don't expect to hear something, you may not hear it, even though it was said. You come into a situation and somebody says something you don't want to hear. You may not hear it, even though they said it. Why does the brain play these kind of tricks on us? How does that happen? Let me explain. We have two sets of eyes. We have the eyes on the front of our face, the biological eyes, but we have a second set of eyes inside of our brain called the mind's eye. And the mind's eye can see things very differently than the biological eyes can see. The mind's eye sees things based on your past experiences, based on your training, based on your upbringing, based on your religious beliefs, based on your political beliefs, based on your biases, based on your prejudices, and based on your expectations. And the mind's eye can see the world very differently than what the biological eyes and ears see and hear. And here's where it really gets sinister. When you're under stress, if your brain has to make a choice as to which set of eyes it's going to believe, the mind's eye or the biological eyes, it is far more likely to default to believing the mind's eye. And when the mind's eye is different than what the biological eyes are seeing, you will experience a flawed perception of reality. It seems so easy. Easy. All we have to do is see things and we'll understand, or hear things and we'll understand, but it isn't that easy. And what makes it so challenging are these things that I call barriers that flaw situational awareness. Barriers are anything that block or prevent or impede your ability to have perception, understanding, or prediction. When I was doing my research, I started to amass a list of situational awareness barriers, thinking, well, how many could there be? 10, 15, maybe 20? When I was done, there was almost 100 situational awareness barriers on that list. Now, we're not going to cover 100 of them today. We'll cover a couple today. And if you want to learn more about the rest of them, then you visit the website, and I talk about all. That's what those 400 articles are all focused on, are the barriers that flaw awareness. Let me introduce you to another barrier to awareness called sensory conflict. Sensory conflict means the inputs coming into your brain from two or more of your senses are not in agreement with each other. They're in conflict with each other. So say, for example, your ears hear something that makes you believe, based on what you're hearing, that what is happening is situation A, whatever that situation is. But at the same time, your eyes see something different than what your ears are hearing. Your eyes see something that makes you believe that what is happening is not situation A, but rather situation B, which is very different than situation A. And now we have sensory conflict. The inputs coming in from two or more of the senses are not in agreement. Stated another way, the jigsaw puzzle pieces aren't fitting together. Well, what happens when the jigsaw puzzle pieces don't fit together? Well, when they do fit together, it's amazing. We have understanding and comprehension and moments of clarity. But when they don't fit together, not so good. We have confusion. And one thing that I can tell you is your brain does not like you being confused, especially if you're in an environment that has an element of risk. Because what your brain knows is if you're confused in a high-risk environment, you are vulnerable. You're vulnerable to make mistakes. You're vulnerable to make bad decisions. And you're vulnerable to get hurt or killed. And your brain does not like you being in that state of vulnerability. So what it can do is, Jerry, I see your hand is up. I don't know if you raised your hand on purpose or by accident, but I'll pause along the way here, Jerry, for some questions, and we can address the questions when we have the stop off point. So what your brain is going to try to do is resolve this confusion quickly. And one of the things it can do is it's trying to resolve the confusion is it can shift your awareness from that which is happening around you, what I call external awareness, to the confusion that's happening inside of your mind, that which I call internal awareness. So you have this shift of awareness to where you stop paying attention to the things that are happening around you, because your attention is now on the confusion. It's on the puzzle pieces that aren't fitting together. And you're trying to mentally resolve this confusion to get the puzzle pieces to all fit together. And when this happens, when your awareness makes this transition from external awareness to internal awareness, you can experience a situational awareness barrier called mind drift. Mind drift means physically you are present, mentally you are somewhere else. The human mind will drift many times every day. Your mind is going to drift during this program. I can't stop it from happening, and neither can you. And you might be thinking, well, Rich, there's no harm and no foul. If my mind drifts away while I'm sitting through this program, I'm not going to get hurt. I'm looking at a computer screen. But you might further think, if I was doing something high risk or high consequence, I would never let my mind drift, because there's too much bad that could happen if I let my mind drift when I'm doing high risk work. So I'd never let that occur, right? That's a wish. Your mind can drift away while you're doing highly risky work. You may not want it to, but it can. In fact, I will go as far as to guess that nearly every person in this program has experienced mind drift while doing a high-risk activity. Now, I don't know that for sure, so I'm going to do a little survey. I'm going to give you a scenario, and if the scenario that I give to you has ever happened to you, then what I'd like for you to do is to hover your cursor over your screen, bring up the chat box, and let me know if this has ever happened to you. You've gotten into your vehicle to drive somewhere. Maybe the trip was going to take you a couple of hours. You drove to your destination, parked your vehicle, and you sat there in momentary wonderment to the fact that there are parts of that trip you have no memory of. You were zoned out. If this has ever happened to you, go to the chat box and let me know if you've ever had this occur. Dee says, "Yep, I have." Go ahead and give me some feedback. Jerry says, "Yes, it has." Mark says, "Yep, it's happened." Claudia, "Yep." John says, "Yes, yes, yes, sure, yes, yep, yep." Okay, all right. Frequently, more often than I'd like. Yes, because I'm old. No, not necessarily because of age, but we've all had it happen. I've had it happen. In fact, as I share with you the things that can impact your situational awareness, those things that I'm sharing with you impact my situational awareness too. My mind can drift during high-risk activities the same as yours can, and I can't stop it. There are some things you can do to help reduce the potential of things like this happening, but we're all vulnerable. Now, that's risky. Driving your car, highway speeds, and your mind is somewhere else. That's a risky endeavor. And you know what makes it more risky? The other people on the road, their minds are drifting too. It's not just you. It's them too. How do we not get in more accidents with so many people with their minds adrift while driving? There's actually good news here. As your conscious mind drifts away, your subconscious mind can step in and drive the vehicle for you using subconscious programming. How does it do that? Very few of us probably have ever stopped to give realization to the fact that every driving experience, every one of them that you've ever taken, every single one of them is stored in memory. You may not remember the biggest majority of them. You may remember the last time you drove somewhere, but if I said, "Where did you drive last October 7th?" Unless there was something special about that day, you don't remember that driving experience. But your brain stored a memory of that driving experience in every single one of them. Think of how many hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of driving experiences we have stored in memory. Those subconscious stores of memory of our driving experiences are called scripts. And when the conscious mind drifts away while we're driving, the subconscious mind can step in and say, it's okay. I can drive the vehicle for you using this programming that I already have stored in there called the scripts. So when the brain accesses the scripts, it can help us to drive the vehicle robotically. Basically, what it's doing is tapping into a stored computer program in our subconscious that allows us to drive the vehicle safely without the conscious thought of driving. We are acting without thinking. This is a beautiful thing that the brain has the ability to do this. So we can put that in the victory column, but not so fast. With everything that's good about how the brain works, there's always a sinister side of it. And here's the downside. If you find yourself in a high-risk, high-consequence decision-making environment, and your mind is adrift from confusion or for some other reason, your brain can pull up a script from past experience, which can cause you to do something without thinking about what you're doing. And if it turns out well, you'll feel like a genius. But if it doesn't turn out well, there might be some people who might want to line up to criticize you. And that criticism might sound like this. What in the world were you thinking when you did that? And the truth of the matter is, you might not have been thinking at all. You might have been robotic. You might have been running a scripted program from the subconscious that you took an action so fast that you really didn't even pause to give thought about what you were doing. The program jumped right in and did it automatically. Now, where in the brain does the puzzle of understanding get assembled? There's got to be some place where all those jigsaw puzzle pieces get put together. And there is a place in the brain where it happens. It's the place in the brain where we have consciousness. It is also the place in the brain where we have conscious awareness. If you're consciously aware of the fact that you're sitting in front of your computer, attending this program, that part of your brain gives you that awareness of place and time. It is also where we form our situational awareness. And I'm going to show you where that happens, again, using another analogy. It happens right here on your magical, mystical Etch-a-Sketch. Every one of us has an Etch-a-Sketch inside of our brain, and like it's inscripted on the top of the toy, it truly is a magic screen. Everything we see, hear, feel, taste, and smell travels down 5 highways in the brain to the destination of the Etch-a-Sketch where it draws a picture. That's why I use the Etch-a-Sketch as the analogy. Etch-a-Sketches draw pictures. Our brain draws pictures to understand. It draws pictures of everything. It draws pictures of what we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we taste, what we smell. The brain draws pictures to understand. Now, most of that drawing of pictures of understanding happens behind the curtain in the subconscious. But we literally see the meaning of words. But you knew that already. We even have a cliche that indicates we know that. Have you ever been carrying on a conversation with someone and you're not really sure they're completely getting what you're saying? So you might say to them, do you see what I mean? Do you see what I'm saying? And if they get it, they might say, yeah, I see what you mean. And if they don't get it, they might say, no, I don't see what you're saying. We do literally see the meaning of words. We see the meaning of all the inputs. The brain draws pictures to understand. If the brain doesn't draw a picture, we don't understand. Some people's words are so eloquent They draw like Picasso paintings on our mind. Some people's words, they're like abstract art. We can't make sense out of what they're saying. And here's the sinister part. Whatever they're saying probably makes complete sense to them. When they're saying whatever words they're saying, the picture they're drawing in their own mind of their words makes sense to them. But it might not make sense to you. And the person who is saying it, that they don't realize that they're not making sense, they don't know it. They don't know that they're not making sense to you. In fact, I can share with you one thing here for sure, completely for certain. Everything that I'm going to share with you during this program, everything is going to make sense to me. I've never confused myself once. The problem is, how do I know if it's making sense to you? Creating what is called a shared awareness. I'll come back to that. So you have this picture on your mental sketch pad, and there's nothing particularly special about the picture that I'm sharing. It's just a picture from one of my corporate or industrial clients that I put up onto a screen. So you've got the puzzle pieces of the picture that are all assembled together. That picture is then snapshotted or screenshotted and sent into memory to search your long-term memory database. This is a big file search. The capacity of the average person's long-term memory is estimated to be about 10 times all the information stored on the internet. Let me pause so you can let that sink in, just how massive long-term memory database is. Access to that database, that's a whole other issue. The average person can only consciously access about 5% of their long-term memory database, which means 95% of everything you've ever learned or experienced in life is completely outside of your conscious awareness. So you've got this picture on the sketch pad that is the gathering of all the puzzle pieces. That picture is then snapshotted and sent up into memory to do the file search, searching that long-term memory database. If it finds a match that's part of the 95%, that's what it's trying to find, is solutions to problems, searching the database. If it finds a match that's part of the 95% outside of your conscious awareness, it can trigger the sixth sense. The sixth sense is the only sense that resides inside the brain and sends information outward. The other five senses are all on the outside of the brain and send information inward. So let's test your long-term memory recall. Do you remember? And you can put your answers in the chat box. Do you remember where you were and what you were doing on the morning of September 11th, 2001, when the planes hit the World Trade Center towers? And I want your vivid memory recall. Hover your cursor over your screen, bring up your chat box, and tell me with the vivid detail that you can, your memory of where you were and what you were doing. Go ahead and type it in for me. Dee says, I was in my office. I can't remember what I was working on, but I was in my office. It was in a work team meeting. Jerry, I'm curious, do you remember who was in the work team meeting with you? Just curious about that. In the waiting room at the doctor's office, about to have a root canal. That unto itself would be memorable. Oh boy, holy cows! There's a lot of answers coming in here. Jethro says, I was at gym class, and there might be some people on the program that are actually too young to even remember where you were. I was in 7th grade at lunch, learned that the planes had crashed into the Twin Towers. I was in New York City the weekend before. Oh, that's scary. I was home I watched the second plane hit the building. Scott says I was on I-95 southbound at the New York border, headed into the city, 12 miles away. That's scary. Jethro says it was at a job interview in high school, and the news was on in the lobby. Standing in my living room, couldn't sit down, Steve said. Had to stand up in horror. Tim says, on a plane at Bradley, waiting to fly to ASSE in Chicago for a committee meeting. Elsie was in Queens. Okay, so pretty good memory. Thank you all for playing along and giving me those answers. If you remember with vivid detail that day, then that day is part of your 5% memory, conscious memory database. And there are two things that allow something that happened that long ago to be able to take a permanent place in that little 5% wedge. And that is emotions and repetition. The more emotional event is, the more likely we are to hold it in the 5% wedge of knowledge. And the more repetition cycles we have the information, the easier it is for us to access that data because of how frequently we have a memory recall of it. And with September 11th, at the anniversary, there's always a reminder of that anniversary, which then causes those memories then to flood back into our minds, just like they did when I asked the question here. All right, so let me ask you another question. Do you remember where you were and what you were doing on the morning of August 13th, 2001, about 28 days before September 11th? And I'll give you a hint if it'll be helpful for you. It was a Monday. Now, I don't want you to guess and say, well, I was probably at work or I was probably in school. I want the vivid detail of where you were and what you were doing on that morning. And if you can remember, then type in the box that you can remember. All right, so Velma says nope. Jethro says no clue, no clue. Scott says I ain't got nothing. Not a clue, not a clue, not a thing. Okay, so what did we just experience here? If you do not have a memory of August 13th, 2001, that day is part of your 95% subconscious memory database. So the September 11th resides in the little 5% wedge, attributed to emotions and repetition. And the August 13th, unless something particularly memorable happened for you on that day, morphs its way out into the 95%, where all of those driving experiences and a whole lot more are also residing. So you've got the picture on the sketch pad that's screenshotted, sent up into memory that can trigger that sixth sense. The sixth sense is the only sense that resides inside the brain and sends information outward. The other five senses are all on the outside of the brain and send information inward. And that sixth sense on the inside of the brain, it has a name. We call it intuition. The definition for intuition is strange. Intuition means knowing. Without knowing, how we know. What? How do you know if you don't know how you know? Intuition does not come to us as knowledge. Intuition comes to us as a feeling. We feel intuitive responses. I'm going to give you some examples of how you can experience intuition. One, you might have the hair stand up on the back of your neck, goosebumps go down your arms, your spidey senses start to tingle. All of a sudden, you're on a heightened level of vigilance because your brain perceives some danger in your environment. You may not know what, and you may not know why. Just all of a sudden, you're like the slumbering puppy, and all of a sudden, it sits straight up and like what? Like it heard something. You might have the voices inside of your head start to talk to you, those little internal voices. The internal voice might be trying to give you good counsel. It might say things like, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't really think you should be doing this. Have you thought that maybe this isn't going to work out very well? Maybe you should think about doing something different. That internal voice is trying to give us good counsel based on something that has been matched in the subconscious. Now, the most common form of intuition is the gut feel, that knotted up, squeezed up feeling in our gut that something isn't right. A lot of people think the gut feeling is psychological. It's not. It's 100% biological. You have an emotional control center inside of your brain. And when the search, the file search, reveals a bad outcome or a series of perceived bad outcomes, it can send a stress message over to the emotional control center, which then sends impulses down nerves that travel down the spinal cord and split off and come into the gut. And when you get that knotted up, squeezed up gut feeling, that's your brain trying its best to alert you to the potential for danger. Your intuition truly is your single most powerful red flag warning system, designed to alert you to the potential for danger. And what makes it so powerful is how big the database is, how massive the amount of information is that is stored in there that is completely outside of our conscious awareness, yet available to give us the access to intuitive knowledge. All right, I'm going to pause here and allow some questions. John, if you want to come back in with the mic on, you can. If you want to stay silenced, you can do that as well. But if you hover your cursor over your screen, there is a Q&A box. So if you have some questions for me up to this point, go ahead and I'll pause for just a moment and take a drink of water and give you a chance, if you have a question, to bring up the Q&A box and type your question in the Q&A box.
Hey, Rich.
Yes.
I can't type a word into the Q&A box. Is it a chat box you do?
No, at the bottom of the Q, there should be a place at the very bottom of the Q&A box, like a little place to type your message at the very bottom of the Q&A box that you can put your cursor there and type. I hope it's working. Pardon?
I don't see it.
No? Yeah, Jerry says it's working. Dee ran a test, said it's working. Okay, so it's at the bottom. You just bring your cursor down and then put your cursor at that very bottom. What I see is a little different than what you see, because I get to see all the responses. But I got a couple people that have typed in and said it's working for them. You might not have access to it, John, because I have you as a panelist and not as a participant. So the Q&A box might be different for somebody who's a panelist. Jethro, gotcha, Jethro. Test. It's working. So if anybody's got a question, go ahead and type it in. And if there aren't questions, then I'll give it just a moment. If there aren't questions, then I'll just I'll continue on. And John, if you have a question, because you have the ability to speak as a panelist, you can go ahead and just ask it if you want. Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. What's that?
So far, it's fascinating. You're doing a great job.
Okay, thank you. So here's a question. How do you turn this understanding into behavior change? Thank you, Alden. When we're learning, Alden, we're actually developing two types of memory as we learn something. We develop a cognitive memory, which is the what do I need to know? Why do I need to know it? And when do I need to know it? And then we develop a second kind of memory called the kinesthetic memory, which is the muscle memory, which is the how do I do it? So you think about like when you were taking driver's ed class, you had classroom, where you learn the laws and the rules of the road and the what do I need to know and why do I need to know it and when do I need to do it. Then you go out and you drive the car to learn how to do it, get behind the wheel and actually physically do it. So we're developing two kinds of memory. And the reason I bring this up is you talk about behavior change, and there's two kinds of behavior. There's the cognitive behavior, the behavior that is based on what I think, and then there's the behavior based on what I do. And sometimes that's aligned, and sometimes it's not aligned. Like somebody will say, do as I say, not as I do, because their cognitive carries one narrative, but their behavior maybe carries a different narrative. So the key to this is trying our very best to develop a narrative that aligns of the way we think and the way we act are parallel, that they go together to create one skill set of both knowledge and action. And the more we develop that, the more we practice that, the easier it is to turn those cognitive and kinesthetic skills into habits that become so automatic that we don't have to think about it anymore. And there are a number of learning tricks that can help somebody to be able to quickly recall things out of memory. Like one of them is the use of acronyms. Like first responders, they use acronyms like ABCs to help us to remember when we're dealing with somebody whose heart might not be beating. What do we need to do? ABCs: airway, breathing, circulation. When I was in fifth grade, which was almost between 45 and 50 years ago, my fifth grade teacher used an acronym to help the students remember something. And now here, 45 years later, I can't forget it. If I get asked, what are the names of the 5 Great Lakes? I know it's Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. I don't even have to think about it or give any pause or look at a map. There they are, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. Why? Because it spells the word homes. And that acronym, when I think of the 5 Great Lakes, I make an automatic connection to the first letter of each letter of the word homes, and the names of the 5 Great Lakes come back to me automatically. And it's a little bit frustrating, really. I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, but I can't forget the names of the 5 Great Lakes because of that memory prompt. So what we're trying to do is develop a robust cognitive memory and a robust kinesthetic memory, put them together and turn them into a skill set that allows us to join the two up, that will then guide our behaviors, because you're talking about behavior change. So to change a behavior, we have to change the script. So we have a cognitive script already in there, and we have a muscle memory script that's already in there. And those scripts drive our behaviors that become our habits, and good habits and bad habits. And as you talk about behavior change, I'm thinking maybe you might be referencing how to change some of our bad habits. And the way to change the bad habits is to replace the bad habit script consciously with a good habit script, and to have that good habit script be done so many times, every time you do the good habit, it stores a script in memory, and you get to the point where your scripts drive your behavior. And the good behavior scripts, when they override the bad behavior scripts, then what we find ourselves is doing the desired behavior automatically, because that's the script that runs, because that's the one that we're playing that script most often. And that's the key to behavior change. And I say that with some caution, because I made it sound a lot easier than what it truly is, because a lot of those early developed habits are very powerful in our minds, and not as easy as just get the eraser, erase it off and play a new script. Now, there are some things that can be done in the way of hypnosis therapy that have been proven to be very effective, and that's going down a different path that is not the right discussion for this session. But behavior can be modified with hypnosis. All right, I'm going to continue on, and if you still have questions, you can type the question into the question box, and I'll stick around at the end and answer all the questions that you have for as long as you need me to stick around. So the foundation of situational awareness is perception. The walls are understanding. Now we got to put a roof on the house. The roof is the highest and perhaps most complex part of situational awareness, and I would argue perhaps the most beneficial, and that is prediction. The ability to anticipate future events before they happen. Now, what I'm going to do is share with you a process for predicting future events. And it doesn't involve a crystal ball or tarot cards or a soothsayer. It involves the very skills we already have stored in our mind and being able to access that knowledge and to use that to allow us to improve our ability to predict outcomes. Now, I have to give you a disclaimer. There's no promise here that if you use this process, that I'm going to guarantee that you're going to be able to successfully predict the outcome of every future event. No one could make you that promise, and I'm certainly not going to. But what I will say is if you use this process, it will improve the probability of you being able to make an accurate prediction of a future event. So let's learn the process. Begin with the end in mind. When you come into a problem, whatever that problem is you're going to be dealing with, before you actually start doing anything physically to deal with that problem, pause and establish for yourself a target, a goal, an objective, a benchmark, something on the horizon that represents the end objective. What do I want this to look like when we are on the other end of this successfully? And then once you get that target or goal established in your mind, I want you to mentally transport yourself to the end, to that end result, to that successful outcome, and look backward on the problem from the end result. And when you look back from the ending toward the beginning, you see things differently. It's easier to see landmines and pitfalls and roadblocks that could obstruct us when we are looking back from the end to the beginning. This is such a powerful concept that Dr. Stephen Covey wrote about this in his book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's a great book. It's the #1 best-selling business leadership book all time worldwide. And one of the 7 habits that Dr. Covey speaks about is to begin with the end in mind. In fact, I used to call that concept when I was teaching it, I used to call it something else. And then I read his book and I went, he and I are talking about the same thing here. Only he called it begin with the end in mind. So with credit to him, I borrowed those words with the same meaning. That's what he tells business leaders. Start with the end goal, look backward toward the problem, and you see things differently. Now, on the front end of a problem, as you first arrive, a lot of times there's a lot of chaos and mayhem and uncertainty and confusion, and some situational awareness barriers can rear their ugliness right on the very front end of a problem that you're trying to take a pause and make a prediction about the future. 3 of those barriers are distractions, interruptions, and task fixation. So let me just give you a brief explanation of each of the 3 of those. You're paying attention to whatever is happening in your environment. And then there's a distraction. What is a distraction? A distraction is anything that pulls your attention away from what you wanted to be paying attention to accidentally. a bright light, a loud noise, a scream, an explosion, something that makes you shift your attention and say, what was that? That's a distraction. An interruption is something that pulls your attention away on purpose. You're looking over here, paying attention, and then somebody comes up to talk to you. When they come up to talk to you, they're trying with intentionality to steal your awareness. Hey, you, I got a question. You shift your attention, say, what do you need? Somebody comes up to you, somebody calls you on a cell phone, somebody text messages you, somebody calls you on a radio. That's an interruption. They both pull your attention away from what you should be paying attention to. The main difference between distractions and interruptions have to do with duration. Distractions tend to be very short-lived. I hear something loud I wasn't expecting, I shift my attention, I figure it out, I shift my attention back. Interruptions can last a lot longer. Perhaps you've had somebody come up to you and say, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? A minute? Really? You know, when somebody says, can I talk to you for a minute? That's code word for somebody who's about to suck 20 minutes of your life away that you're never going to get back. Rarely do conversations ever last a minute. It's a cliche. Can I talk to you for a minute? So they steal your attention. They talk, you talk, they talk, you talk. We're social creatures. Maybe we'll keep our 6 feet distance now, talk back and forth. And you can be off, your attention can be pulled away for a long time when you're interrupted. Task fixation occurs when we give all of our attention to just one little area of the problem that we're dealing with. And task fixation happens a lot of times when our hands and eyes are coordinated on completing a task. You go heads down, paying attention to what your hands are doing. Makes sense. You don't want to lose a fingertip, so your hands and eyes are coordinating. You're focusing on the task that you're performing. But when we focus on a task for an extended period of time, the focus can turn into fixation. And then in a dynamically changing environment, when we're fixated on a task, we may not be paying attention to the other things that are happening around us. We have small picture awareness, not big picture awareness. So as we're trying to predict the future, we would ask ourselves a question of where is this event, whatever the event is, whatever problem that you're dealing with, where is this event headed if we don't do anything but watch? Now, I know you're not there just to be a casual observer to problems. We're there to be problem solvers and fix things. But if you just pause on the front end and ask yourself, what would happen here in the midst of this problem if I didn't do anything? Now, this is not a strategy. I'm not suggesting that you not engage and try to fix a problem. This is not a strategy. It's a mindset. To ask yourself, what could happen if I don't do anything, forces your thinking into the future. It forces you to look out on the horizon and see the potential bad things that could happen. How far out into the future we look depends on how fast conditions are changing. If the conditions are changing fast, our look into the future might be 30 seconds to a minute to 2 minutes. If the conditions are changing slower, our look into the future might be minutes or hours or days. But that look into the future allows us to see the potential bad things that could cause harm if we don't do anything to try to stop those bad things from happening. The next question connected to that previous question is how long is it going to take for an undesirable outcome to occur? So if you pause and you look out on the horizon and you see something bad that can happen on the horizon, this question says, how far out is that horizon? How far out is that bad thing? How long is it going to take for that bad thing to occur? What we're talking about here are windows of opportunity. And in any problem that we're dealing with, we have a window of opportunity in which we can fix the problem safely. And sometimes that window of opportunity is closing slowly and we have a lot of time. And sometimes that window is closing quick and we got to make fast decisions and take fast actions to be able to fix the problem. Every event that we deal with, every problem unfolds at a certain speed, a certain pace. And it's absolutely essential that we keep track of the passage of time, especially in stressed environments. In fact, it's so important to keep track of the passage of time that I built tracking the passage of time into the definition of situational awareness. Situational awareness is your ability to perceive and understand what's happening in the environment around you while being mindful about how time passes. Tracking the passage of time means that we are tracking how fast our windows of opportunity are closing. Then we have to set some expectations. Those expectations are set by answering some questions. Questions like, can we change this outcome? Can we fix this problem? Can we make this situation better? We want to. We've trained to. If you're a first responder, you've taken an oath of office to be a problem solver. People call 911 because they need problems fixed. You get called into situations because workers need help getting a problem fixed. Can we change the outcome? Sometimes we can, and sometimes we can't. And this question forces us to be honest with ourselves. Because here's the advice. Don't get in the way of the outcomes that you cannot change. Some we can, some we can't. Don't get in the way of the outcomes you can't change, because if you do, you'll become a victim of the outcome. The outcome will occur anyhow. And along with that outcome, it will make you a victim as well. Are the conditions right? So we have to understand something about the conditions of the problem that we're dealing with. How do we develop an understanding about the conditions? With the first two parts of situational awareness: gathering up the puzzle pieces, perception, keeping our head on a swivel, gathering the intel, sizing up the problem, taking the puzzle pieces, putting them together to form understanding, allows us to understand what the conditions are that we're dealing with, and then make an assessment. Are these conditions right to fix the problem? If the conditions are right, and it takes strong situational awareness to understand if the conditions are right. If the conditions are right, then aggressively fix the problem. Get in there and woo-doo, fix it. If the conditions are right. If the conditions are not right, then be conservative. Essentially what I'm saying is be smart aggressive. And I see a lot of people get themselves into bad situations because they are aggressive on a problem that the conditions were not right to be aggressive. Why were they aggressive without thinking? Because they were doing what they were trained to do, which was aggressively fix problems. Maybe their training was missing the conservative option of don't jump in and attack every problem with aggressiveness. So sometimes conservative action is the smarter thing to do. And sometimes conservative just means wait till you get some more help or some more intel before you engage the problem. Do we have the right resources? This is an important question because we depend on resources to help us to solve problems. Rarely are we alone in the problems that we deal with. Sometimes we are, but a lot of times we depend on the help of other people, coworkers and bosses and subordinates. So here's a question. Are all workers equal? Now, that's a rhetorical question. You don't have to put your answer in the chat box. Are all workers equal in knowledge, skills, abilities, fitness, and stamina? Are they all equal? I think your answer would be no. They're not. And it makes sense that the answer would be no. If you had somebody who's been on the job for 30 days, surely they don't have the same job knowledge as somebody who's been there for 30 years. They're not equal in knowledge. If you have somebody who at work, say, has a sedentary lifestyle, they don't exercise, and they're 50 pounds overweight, they wouldn't have the same fitness and stamina as somebody who runs 2 miles a day and does CrossFit 3 days a week. They're not comparable in fitness and stamina. So if we know this to be true, if they're not all equal in abilities, then don't hold the same expectations as if they are. Don't expect the 30-day worker to have the same knowledge as the 30-year worker, or the same access to intuition that the 30-year worker does. We actually develop 5 kinds of situational awarenesses. Not one situational awareness, 5. First, personal awareness. That's your look in the mirror, your self-assessment. What is my knowledge, skills, abilities, fears, phobias, fitness, stamina? Where do I need to be? Where am I at now? How do I get from where I'm at to where I need to be? What is my self-development plan to be to the level of knowledge and abilities that I need to get to, and set that plan out? And for new workers, that plan can be years. You know, my son is an electrical lineman, and he's an apprentice, meaning he's learning. He's in school while on the job, and that apprenticeship for electrical linemen is a 4-year program. Well, surely he doesn't have the same knowledge as those journeymen have that have been on the job for 15 or 20 years. But he's got a plan, that apprenticeship program plan, personal awareness. The second awareness is the awareness of the other people that you depend upon to help you to get the problem solved. Peers, subordinates, bosses, people from other organizations or other departments within your company, your knowledge of their abilities and limitations. The third awareness is resource awareness. That's the awareness of everything that you depend upon to get your work done that isn't human. Tools, equipment, monitors, software, and knowing its abilities and limitations before you need to depend upon it. So an intimate knowledge of all those non-human resources. The fourth awareness is the actual problem that you're dealing with, the incident or the event awareness, and the in the moment gathering intel of what is happening. That's the incident itself. The fifth awareness, which I mentioned earlier, is shared awareness, the ability to get everybody on the same page of understanding. And this is difficult because it's rooted in communications. The ability to get everybody to have a common operating picture, that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing, that everybody has the same understanding of what is our strategy here, what is our tactics here, what this team doing impacting or complementing what this team is doing. Are we all on the same sheet of music? A lot of metaphors there. But shared awareness is essentially having the same picture of understanding on the sketch pad of all the workers about what the strategy and tactics are that are being used to try to solve the problem. Can we operate faster than the conditions are changing? With our knowledge of those 5 awarenesses that I just mentioned, can we operate faster than the windows of opportunity are closing on us? To be able to predict the future, we have to use our imagination. To use our imagination is to use our mind's eye to look into the future and see things that are going to happen that have not yet happened. So let me sum up the situational awareness development process, that 3-step continuum. If you have questions, you can go over to the question box and type those in, and I'll answer them when I'm done kind of with the summary here. So how do we develop situational awareness? It starts with perception. Perception is using your 5 senses to gather information about what's happening around you, seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling, gathering up the jigsaw puzzle pieces. Then those puzzle pieces are sent into the brain to the destination of the sketch pad, where the jigsaw puzzle pieces all get put together, all get assembled. That assembled picture is then snapshotted and sent into memory to search your long-term memory database. It searches the little 5% wedge and the big green 95% wedge, looking for solutions to problems. If you're going to get the benefit of intuition, and there's no guarantee that you will, but if you're going to get the benefit of intuition, This is where it would happen in the understanding phase of the situational awareness development process. After we understand what's going on, then we got to make a decision. A decision is a choice from at least two options. That's the definition of a decision, a choice from at least two alternatives. If you're going down the road and there's no intersections, you don't have to decide whether you're going to turn left or right. There's no intersections. But if you come to a T in the road, you have to make a decision. Do I turn left or do I turn right? You have to have at least two options to be able to make a decision. So what I suggest is you're dealing with a problem and you're saying, what are my options? That you always have an aggressive option, the get in there and kick some butt, get the problem solved, woo option. But you also have a second option, which is a conservative option, which is the let's not jump into this. Let's take a pause. Let's take a little more time, a little more investigation, maybe get some more resources before we go all in on the problem. After you make your decision, then you take an action. Make your decision, take an action, right? That's what we've all been taught. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. If you do that, that could be a big setup for a big mistake. And you're like, well, wait a minute, Rich. We've all been taught, make a decision, take an action. What I'm going to suggest that you do is consider inserting a step between decision and action. And that tiny little step can make all the difference. That step you're going to insert is to make a prediction. Make your decision, pause for just a second or two, and visualize in your mind's eye the outcome of that great decision that you have just made. Look into the future and see if that great decision is going to work out or not before you actually physically start doing something and then realize this isn't working, because then it might be too late. You might already set things in motion that you can't undo. Use your predictions to drive your actions, not your decision, your prediction. If your prediction of an aggressive action is good, then implement your aggressive action. But if your envisionment of your aggressive action is not good, then before you begin to do anything, look to another option. Look for a plan B or a plan C, which can include a conservative choice, as should always be one of the things that you give consideration to. So that sums up the situational awareness development process of perception, understanding, and prediction. So I'm going to leave this screen up for a little bit while I take questions if there are any, so that you have the website, you have my email, you have my phone number if you want to follow up with me for any reason. That's how you reach me. So I'll pause and allow there any questions that you might have. And again, I look over this way because I have a second screen that I look over for the Q&A. So if you have questions, go ahead and type those in. And John, if you want to come back in, turn your mic on and come back in, you're welcome to do that as well. Hover your cursor over your screen, it should bring up a Q&A box. Do you have an example of how companies applied SA in the workplace? A lot of examples, Mark. I work with both first responders and business and industry, and in both cases, when I get called in, it's usually because they've had an event or a series of events where they have assessed that the problem was that somebody had flawed awareness, or they weren't paying attention, or that they made a bad decision, but they don't really understand why they made the decision that they made. And they have, I can do two things. I can come in and I can do, I don't want to necessarily call it an accident investigation, because that kind of takes on a more formal process like an OSHA inquiry. The investigation that I do is designed more to help identify situational awareness challenges that were in play either for the individual or the workplace or the culture, and then to make some recommendations about how to help that worker or other workers develop and maintain stronger situational awareness when they're working in whatever the environment is that they're working in, and offer them best practices, ideas for ongoing training, safety briefs that have situational awareness connected messages. For first responders, a lot of times it's secondary to, unfortunately, either a significant near miss, a significant injury, or a fatality event. And they realize that there were human factors or situational awareness related challenges, and they want to learn from it to keep it from happening again. And I'll come in and I'll either do an assessment or just do a training for them about what situational awareness is, how it's developed, best practices, to go into more detail on some of the more challenging situational awareness barriers. And for the first responder group, Mark, that program can take 8 hours. For business and industry, it's usually shorter because they can't take folks off the line. So it's can range from 2 hours to 4 hours, the training component of it. So, but I have a lot of companies and first responder units that I have worked with. I've been at this almost 20 years now, and a lot of successes. And so thank you for asking about that. Other questions that you have, go ahead and type into the question box, and I'll answer them for you. It can be specific to this, or it can be, you can kind of veer off the script and ask some other unrelated type question. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know. Sometimes people want to know about things that I don't know anything about, and I just say I don't know. So it's easy to trick me or trip me up. But hover your cursor over your screen, type your questions in if you have them. And John, if you want to come back in with your mic on, you can. If you want to stay muted, you can do that as well. And I'll give you all a few minutes if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in. If you want to speak, you can raise your hand, and I can turn your audio on if you'd rather speak your question instead of type it. Maybe you're on a phone or something like that. You can do that, and I can turn it on so you can speak.
I think you answered all their questions, Rich.
Yeah, I think so. That's unusual. That or they're sitting there thinking, should I get out of my pajamas today? I talk with a lot of folks, and I've done quite a few of these in the morning, and one of my survey questions is, raise your hand if you're still in your pajamas. I didn't do that for this one, but it's amazing how many folks are like, it's 10 a.m. They're still in the pajamas. I mean, they're at work, but they're not necessarily in the normal business attire that they would be working in, which is understandable. I've found it kind of hard to get formal. I put on a collared shirt today just for you all, and otherwise it's been pretty much t-shirts for a month. Again, if you have any questions, just hover your cursor over the screen, type into the Q&A box, or if you want to speak, you can raise your hand, and I'll turn your microphone on. Elsie says proper Zoom attire is half PJs and half work clothes. So kind of like the old style mullet. They used to say, business in the front and party in the rear. So Elsie, so it's like business on the top and quarantine on the bottom kind of thing with the PJs on the bottom. Yeah, and I get it. I mean, I'm sitting here with sweatpants on. I mean, you don't know that. See the collared shirt. Oh, he got all dressed up. Only on the top, Elsie. Only on the top. Jeff said, thanks. Enjoyed it. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. Other questions that you have or comments that you have, or if you want to come in on by voice, just raise your hand. I don't want to keep you here longer than we promised you, because I think we said 90 minutes. And so if you're
well, that was outstanding, Rich. That was wonderful. And could you address that you recorded it and it'll be available?
Yeah, I did make a recording of this, so I will send the link to the recording out to everyone who registered. Some people registered and weren't able to make it, and that's okay. And they won't know that I'm saying this to you because they weren't here to get it. But I will send the link to the recording out so everyone will have it to be able to listen to again or to share with your coworkers. And feel free to share it as widely as you want. It's totally free for you to use. So use it to your content to help those that you work for better understand the foundation of situational awareness. Thank you, Elsie, for that comment. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate the kind words. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm just gonna hang here for a moment, and I guess that I would ask you all one question for those who want to hang around for just a moment. In the chat box, let me know how the pandemic is affecting you and the work that you do. Are you working from home or not working at all, or you're considered essential and you actually have to go to work? Just curious, not trying to pry into your private life. I'm at home. I'm a traveling speaker. So in 5 days, I had 44 programs cancel in 5 days, which essentially shut down everything. And I'm not complaining because I'm home. I'm healthy. My family's healthy. And I have one son who's a firefighter in Madison, Wisconsin. So he's an essential worker. So my greatest concern right now is for him and his wife and my 2 grandkids in their well-being because of his exposure to things on the front line. But the rest of us are home and healthy, and I consider that a blessing, because I know there are a lot of people that aren't healthy and have suffered tremendous losses with loved ones, with financially. So I consider the situation I'm in to be gifted compared to others. So Mark, working from home, getting into conducting webinars for your clients. I think there are a lot of people getting into the virtual world, kind of vaulted into it. I've been doing virtual programs for almost 3 years now, but more now than ever before, because a lot of places, if given the choice, would rather have me live in front of their audience. And I get that. That's a whole different experience when you're doing it live. But now, in the world that we're in, really the only alternative, well, there's 2 alternatives to live. Don't do any training, or train in the virtual format. And I hope that people just don't give up on all training and development of their workers, but find a way to do it virtually, which is not quite as inspiring as live meetings and live presentations. And I get that. But we're all doing our best to try to find our way in this new world. Jerry says, wintering in Florida while still working virtually to help the town of Columbia, Connecticut in emergency management. Jerry, good on you for being in Florida. I'm in Minnesota. Last week, we had 6 inches of snow that was couched around Easter. Everybody dreams of a white Christmas. We had a white Easter, 6 inches of snow. And that was a shock. Kind of a shocker. Minnesota is known for having snow in April, but I bet you didn't have any snow in Florida for the holiday. Um, Working from home, but still working. Good for you. Working from home. Brother is a first responder, very concerned about him. Velma, I understand your concern. I mean, they talk about the hospitals as being on the front line, but it's the first responders that are bringing those COVID positive patients to the hospitals. And, they're, by the time they get to the hospital by an ambulance, the hospital knows that they're probably dealing with somebody who's got those symptoms. But when the fire department responds to a call, maybe the call is a report of somebody with chest pains. When they get there, they don't know if that person is COVID positive or not. And the precautions that they have to take are tremendous. And you're right to be concerned. And I know Mark's a first responder too. And curious, Mark, if your fire department is doing anything differently. And there was someone else on here who was also.
Hey, Rich, I sent a link to everybody in the chat.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make them aware of there's a weekly webinar series every Wednesday at 9 o'clock in the morning that the federal OSHA people are doing in New England.
Okay.
So
let me, John, what I'm going to do right now, the only ones who can see the chat are you and I. So I'm going to change that setting so that everyone can see the chat. And I'm going to ask you to post it again, post that link again so that everyone can see it. Because I changed the setting now that says that all panelists and attendees can see the chat. So go ahead and post that link one more time. And Mark, I set you up, Mark, so that you can talk as well. So if you turn your microphone on your end, Mark, you'll be able to speak up.
Okay, there we go. Thanks, Rich. Yeah, twofold. First responders all over Connecticut are battling this on a regular basis, and we have all kinds of protocols in place, not only for going to the firehouse as volunteers responding, but also cleaning apparatus and gear after a call. And it's been stressful in that regard because it's a change of operation, and sometimes that changes on a weekly basis. And my question, just to kind of maybe dig a little deeper, is I was just wondering if you had an example, a simple example you can provide the people in attending here, how companies have maybe applied situational awareness and tried to improve outcomes of safety in the workplace.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you can expand just a simple example on that.
Yeah. So I'll give you one example from a oil refinery that I do business with, which is a subsidiary of ExxonMobil. And what they had was a series of incidents where the oil refinery operators were making some bad decisions in high-risk environments. So let me kind of just frame it for those who might not be familiar with the oil refining business. So you think of, if you've ever seen an oil refinery, it's just, it's a bunch of pipes and machinery. And as long as the oil stays in the pipes, those operators are very talented at what they do. But when something occurs that they call an upset condition, and the oil gets outside the pipes, those operators suddenly and unexpectedly find themselves in a high-risk, high-consequence, time-compressed environment with rapidly changing conditions. And that's not the environment that they're used to working in. And believe it or not, it's not an environment that they receive a whole lot of training on what to do if something like that happens, other than stop the leak. And that's really what all their training is focused on, is as quickly as you can, get that leak stopped. Because that, takes away a lot of the problems. Just like as a firefighter, Mark, put the fire out and a lot of the problem goes away. So what they found is they were having a series of incidents where they were having leaks of flammable, toxic, caustic materials, different events, and the workers were making bad decisions and putting themselves in in danger, in a couple cases, grave danger, with the actions that they were taking that didn't seem to fit the situation. So when I come in and did the assessment, one of the things I did is I looked at how their operators were trained, because what the operators were doing didn't seem to make sense to the situation. So as I looked at their training, what I found is that the operators did not have adequate training or practice. You talk the cognitive and the kinesthetic, the cognitive, the what, when, why, and the kinesthetic, the how. They didn't have a good connection of those two memory pathways on what to do when product gets out of the pipes. So what they were doing is almost going in that robotic, automatic, action-oriented, stop the leak. And the one that set the whole thing on its ear was a leak of a product called naphtha, and a worker was in proximity to where the leak occurred, and he had to, he thought he had to get to a valve to turn the valve off. And to get to the valve, he had to wade through the naphtha. And while he was wading through the naphtha on his way to the valve, that vapor cloud found a source of ignition. And when it did, it lit him up and set him on fire. And even though he had fire resistive coveralls on, those coveralls won't sustain or they degrade with direct flame contact. So he got set on fire, and while they would tell you stop, drop, and roll, he was in the middle of the product. If he stopped, dropped, and rolled, he'd be rolling around in naphtha. So he started running to get himself out of it, and it was winter. There was snow on the ground. Workers tackled him, got him put out. He lived. But what I was able to help them to understand is that their operators didn't know how to develop and maintain situational awareness in those high stress, upset condition environments. So we put together a 3-pronged solution for this company that involved training all the workers about how to make high-risk, high-consequence decisions using situational awareness. And then we actually had them do hands-on evolutions where they physically would do things based on what the conditions were, not on what automatic programming said. So they got to become critical thinkers and resilient problem solvers and not be automatic thinkers. And then we created some simulation type exercises, because the hands-on stuff really gets labor intensive and time consuming, where simulation, you can literally do it, learn how to make simulated decisions on desktop scenarios, and developed a skill set of critical thinking using simulation. So it was a 3-prong approach of training on awareness and high-risk decisions, hands-on scenarios to train the muscle memory of what to do, and then the simulation scenarios to reinforce the cognitive critical thinking skills. And what they reported back to me was that it made a shift, an entire shift on how their operators think and behave in those upset conditions. Fundamentally, they do things differently now. They think before they act. They don't go charging in on problems when the windows of opportunity are closing quickly, and a lot of times they are with products spilling out of pipes. That they look into the future. They don't get in the way of the outcomes. They have a full fire brigade on site, and they're quicker about calling the fire brigade in instead of trying to deal with it themselves. They defer to the expertise of letting the fire brigade members now deal with the toxic, caustic, or flammable leak, where before they wouldn't. So it created a fundamental shift in how those workers look at what they do. One of the things that we did, Mark, which is going to sound crazy, that we would think these workers were never taught this, but they were never taught this. One of the things that we told them is when they have a leak, one of the smartest things they can do is run for their lives. And they told me, no one's ever told us that. All we've ever been taught to do is stop the leak. Get in there, stop the leak. It's all about get the leak stopped to prevent further escalation of the problem. The stop the leak is the aggressive action. The run for your life is the conservative action. See, as we talked earlier about aggressive and conservative, they never had the second option. They never had a decision tree that considered two options. Their only option was the aggressive, fix the problem option. And if the conditions are right, absolutely, that's what I want them to do. But if the conditions aren't right, to throw themselves into that situation is to almost assure they're going to have a significant near miss or a tragedy. So we reprogrammed their thinking about the risk that they take under certain conditions. And it worked. I started working with them 5 years ago, and now I go there and I train every one of their new workers. Now I was due to be there this year. I don't know if I'll get there this year to train their new workers, at least in person. We might do something virtually now for this year, but it's working for them. So that's an example. And if you need anything clarified, then go ahead and ask questions and I'll clarify to the extent that I can. I want to keep some things confidential for the client.
Well, that was perfect. Thanks, Rich.
You're welcome. Again, if anybody else wants to come in live with a question, just go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll turn your microphone on so that you can come in live. It can be a question related to this program or a question that might be something situational awareness or decision-making related that we didn't cover during the program, or you can type your question in the box. John, I do see the link to the Zoom. So I hope that others can see that now too, that I've turned on, that they can see it says the link. Jerry says the link says invalid meeting ID. So,
yeah, I sent another link at 9:52.
Okay.
That one brings them to the main.
Okay. What does that stand for, John? New
Hampshire Small Business Development Center.
Okay. And then there's a clickable link there for them to get to it?
Right. You'll look for the classes. They're on Wednesdays at 9 o'clock.
Okay. All right. Good.
They will have to register with New Hampshire Small Business, but it's free and it's easy, and because they're the ones that organize the meetings.
Okay. All right. Good. Jerry, did that help you? Just go ahead and let us know in the comment box if that got you the information that you needed. And if there are other questions, go ahead and either raise your hand to ask them in person or type them in the box, either one. And I'll be glad to unmute you and let you chat if you want to. If you need to go ahead and go. I don't want to hold anybody here longer than they need to stay, but I'll stay as long as folks have questions for me or discussion.
We really appreciate this, Rich. This was excellent. And I just want to let people know that I don't know what the meeting next month will be. If you're not on my email list, you can send me an email. I'll drop my email in the chat for people that want to be on the distribution list for next month's notice.
Okay.
It's john.abel@ct.gov.
There you go. Yep, I see it.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
I don't see any more questions.
Nope.
So really appreciate this, Rich.
You're welcome. I'll go ahead and close out, and then I will get the link sent out to everyone.
Okay. And I did send you another link via email, I hope. I'm having trouble with my email, but maybe you could send out this PDF file when you send out your recording to the attendees. Can you do that?
I don't know, John, what I can do. We'll talk offline. The technology is a little new for me. I do have everyone who registered. I have their names and email addresses. So there'll be a way to do something. Just follow up with me when we get offline, and we'll figure out how to do what you want to have done.
Very good. Very good.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Rich.
All right. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Situational Awareness Matters Show with Dr. Richard Gasaway. If you're interested in learning more about situational awareness, human factors, and decision-making under stress, visit his website, samatters.com. If you're interested in booking Dr. Gasaway for a program, or if you would like to be a guest on his show, click the Contact Us tab at the top of the homepage.